everyone, welcome to another episode of Let's Talk About Sickle Cell, the Sickle Cell podcast raising awareness of the condition and discussing the ongoing issues that we have to deal with every single day. I'm your host, Janika Leah, and today we have an absolutely amazing conversation in store for you. Now, I do just want to let everyone who's listening know that Michael's voice will be heard in this episode. Today's guest is British actress, singer and patron of Sickle Cell Care Manchester, Victoria Ekanoye. Now, for our UK listeners, Victoria is probably most famously known for her role as Angie Appleton in Coronation Street, but our US listeners may be more familiar with Victoria for her role as Rachel in The Royals. Her credits also include a personal favourite TV show of mine, which I had to mention, Death in Paradise, which I love, as well as Celebrity X Factor and a celebrity special of The Chase, where she raised money for Sickle Cell Care Manchester. Living with sickle cell, Victoria also uses her platform to raise awareness of the condition, and we've also featured on a BBC Sounds podcast together called The Sister Collective, talking about relationships and all things to do with love. So I definitely recommend checking that out if you'd like to hear more about her story. In this conversation, Victoria shares with us her experiences of living with sickle cell, from being told she was just having growing pains to sharing travel tips and advice for others who live with sickle cell and may be thinking of pursuing a career in acting or music. So, let's talk about sickle cell with Victoria Ekanoye.
The reason why, obviously, we wanted you to do the interview, I mean, I suffer from SS, sickle cell anemia, and obviously, I was surprised to learn that I didn't even know that you had a condition until I saw you on a show when you donated your money to sickle cell anemia.
The Chase.
The Chase, yeah, that's it, The Chase. So I watched the show because the thing is that sickle cell gets so few mentions, literally, you know. There is, I mean, for example, in 100 years, there's never been a UK broadcaster has ever commissioned a full-blown documentary on sickle cell anemia, ever, none of them. You know, and which is quite heartbreaking when you think that the mortality rate for SS sufferers in 2008, we got this from the Department of Health, was 42 for males and 46 for females.
Yeah.
So
how it's not given the respect it deserves is beyond me. I mean, I do understand that, you know, not a lot of people know about it, but that's just down to the education and the awareness and the focus not having been on it before. So now I feel everything that I'm doing, hopefully I want to help in some way, you know, with my work with the charity.
Okay, for example, very quickly, because it's not about me, but my older brother, who's not alive anymore, he was diagnosed with sickle cell anemia when he was 2 years old, because he had suffered heart failure and he kept being ill and they couldn't understand what the problem was. And I grew up outside of London in a predominantly white area, women, black kids in the whole area. None of the doctors knew why he kept being brought to hospital with the different ailments. And then there was one occasion when there was a doctor that was in Ashford in Middlesex, came down from London and said he might have sickle cell anemia. So they ran the Middlesex Hospital in London. They did the test and they found out. So when I was born 2 years later, they looked for it straight away at Ashford Hospital. So that's why from the age of, I was 6 months old, because we weren't raised by our parents, we were fostered, but from 6 months old, growing up in Ashford and Middlesex, I knew that I had a condition. At what age were you diagnosed with the full-blown SS condition?
Well, mine's a little bit of a strange story too. So my mum's a carrier, and my dad had the full condition, but my dad wasn't a part of my life, so there was nothing for us to compare the symptoms to. And because I was so sporty when I was younger, which again is not something that a lot of people with sickle cell can do, but because I was so into so much sport and I was training as a sprinter, so because I was doing all that, we kind of put it down to, you know, just fatigue of the body, maybe a bit of dehydration because of how much sport I was doing. And any of the pains and things like that, we genuinely put it down to the sport. But also when we went to the doctor, because my mum says she remembers, you know, I was always getting sick. I caught everything going. I had moments where I was really tired, didn't want to go to school because I was in pain, and she just didn't quite understand what was going on because she was a carrier, like I said, and there wasn't as much information as well in, like, I don't know, the early mid 80s. the doctor actually said it was growing pains. So they knew nothing of it. So actually, we thought that I was a carrier because I hadn't had any symptoms that showed that. And also, you know, there wasn't the time of the internet for you to just Google, and, you know, it's so helpful now to be able to do that. We didn't know anybody else with sickle cell. And it was when I got older and I was actually working on a job in Mallorca, in Alcudia, and the climate, it just, my body couldn't cope because it was so hot, and I obviously wasn't drinking enough water, and I was performing, so I was active all the time. That was actually in my early 20s, if you can believe it. So all of these symptoms that I was having, because I have SC, thankfully, it's a milder version, as you know, the symptoms weren't so bad that I would be hospitalized for anything. And also, naughtily, because I didn't want my mum to pull me from the sports teams or all the sports that I was doing, I would kind of play down the pain and play down the symptoms. So actually, I was diagnosed technically in my early 20s, in 2004, even though most people know from infancy, you know. But again, like, you know, with your brother, I guess unless you know something about it, or there's something that's flagged with the doctor, or there's a symptom that takes you into a hospital, and then maybe the tests are taken, you just don't know. And we didn't. But I'm really lucky. I feel really lucky, because had I known, maybe I would have lived differently, because it can be so restrictive, as you know. It was quite debilitating. So maybe I'd have felt scared to do certain things, so I could continue to have as normal a childhood as I could. But part of me also understands that, you know, it's a progressive condition, and it's not something that you can take lightly, especially given the fact that I'm not just a carrier, I actually have the condition. So
there are a lot of alarm bells there, you know, that,
mm-hmm.
and I just find it so alarming that, you know, you had lived those 20 years with not knowing, you know, because even things like flying is dangerous.
Yeah. So I fly more frequently, I think, than anybody should with sickle cell should, due to the nature of my job, and also because my partner lives in France. So thankfully, it's a short haul flight, which is great. It's only 2 hours long. I'm very, very careful with how much, you know, making sure that I prep my body for it, whether it's making sure I've taken all my supplements, I've eaten well, I've gotten a good night's sleep, and the water, being hydrated. And because it's a short haul flight, it's fine. It's not comfortable. It isn't comfortable being on a plane at all. And it certainly isn't comfortable once I'm off, and it lasts for a while. But I'm lucky that it is short haul. But yeah, even flying, there are so many things that I guess those who don't suffer from the condition, and rightly so, take for granted, because they've not had to worry about that.
Do you think that if you had grown up in a more cosmopolitan area or city such as London or Birmingham, you might have been diagnosed sooner?
I think that the awareness and the education within you know, the medical profession is quite low, or was quite low, especially in the 80s in general. I do think that certain places that will have had, I guess, higher levels of people with the condition, or doctors that will have trained in that, you know, where the bigger hospitals are and things like that, I think definitely would have made a difference. But at the same time, I mean, we moved so much with me growing up. I was born in Bury, but we moved so much. And there was a period of time that we were in Manchester, and it was actually during that time when I was involved in all the sport. But again, I think the actual main reason as to why I was A, diagnosed so late, and B, the doctors didn't really understand what was going on with my body, is because I didn't display the symptoms the same way that people with SC, for instance, would. So I think that's got a lot to do with it.
When you got a breakthrough at your big break in acting with Corrie, and then obviously the Corrie schedules are quite punishing.
Yeah.
And did you share your condition with your employers? I mean, did you let the producers know?
Yeah, so contractually, you have to, obviously, when you go into a job for health and safety reasons, insurance reasons, all of that, you have to let every employer know that you have the condition. Partly so they know how to deal with it, or at least there's somebody, you know, if something was to happen, God forbid, if something was to happen, they're aware that the condition is something that you suffer with, and therefore they know how to get the correct treatment, were you to, I don't know, go to hospital or something. And it's very unlikely, but you have to be careful in that way. But also because there may be some things that you're required to do, not necessarily in Coronation Street. I can't imagine they'll have me skydiving or bungee jumping in you know, soaps and things like that. But it's also just important to make sure, for instance, filming in the winter when it's really, really cold, making sure that I have the heat packs, which I had. I have the really big warm winter coats that they give you for when you're filming outside, but also I had the heat packs in my hands. So the people on set knew that I had the condition, and they knew that if ever there was even a slight break in filming, they would make sure I'm indoors rather than waiting out in the cold and shivering and stuff like that. So it definitely makes a difference. And you're right, the schedule for any shows, but especially soaps, can be incredibly intense because you are filming multiple episodes at multiple times. And you can be there, you know, 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. You could get breaks in between, of course, but it can be really, really, really full on. So, so I feel it's always important to make sure that your employer knows your condition, so that more than anything, so that if anything happens, they can make sure that they're looking after you correctly from the get-go.
What advice would you give to young kids who want to pursue a career in the arts, who have sickle cell and are often told, well, you can't do this, you can't do that, there are restrictions on what you can do? So what advice would you give?
I think as far as any advice to give to, you know, budding artists, whether they're actors or singers who suffer from the condition, I think it's incredibly important for you to manage things when it comes to your own lifestyle, so that you're aware if something happens, whether it's on set or in the studio or anything like that, you know how to help yourself the best, and you educate yourself as much as possible so that then you can educate others around you in the workplace. And this would be colleagues or employees, so that people know how to help, you know, and don't ask too much of you unnecessarily, you know, things like that. But I think, you know, I believe, and thankfully, as I said, with me having SC, my symptoms were of a level where I was still able to do certain things which aren't necessarily what most children with SC can do. So growing up, or SS can do. So growing up, obviously, sport is kind of a no-no. But I do think, regardless of what the profession is that you want to go into, I think the education side is the key, but you have to stay positive, because mental health is so important with a chronic illness, so incredibly important. So personally, it's not something that I go into work and I start discussing with everybody. You know, it's not the first thing that comes out of my mouth, but it is important along the line to be as honest as you can. And then I understand why people would not want to tell their employer or their colleagues that they have the condition, out of fear that, you know, it might stop them from progressing within the company or getting a job in the first place. I understand that, but ultimately health has to come first. So I think it's really, really important that we speak to them about it. And I think it's the education, as long as they understand what the condition is and how it affects the job and how it doesn't affect the job, you know, get rid of any of the myths and things like that. That's the key thing. So it is always about awareness and education. But I just think never give up on what really sets your soul on fire and what your passions are. I think that regardless of your condition, you know, there's always a way forward in some capacity, in whatever it is that you love.
Can you tell us more about your own efforts to raise awareness for sickle cell anemia? Because I'm obviously now being in Coronation Street, which is probably the most famous, so it gives you a platform, doesn't it? It gives you, you know, you've got a profile now as a celebrity that was in, as I said, this iconic program. So how has that empowered you then to raise awareness for the condition?
I feel really, really grateful for a number of reasons for being a part of Coronation Street. It's such an iconic show, and it's pretty much, it's a national treasure. But one of the main things that it's really done for me is given me a platform to then be able to raise the awareness that I need to with a condition that's so important to me, not just because I have it, but because I see how little people know about it and how little is done, and there's so little funding in comparison to so many other conditions and charities and things like that. So I'm now patron of Sickle Cell Care Manchester, which they're an incredible team, and we're working on lots of amazing ideas. Obviously, with everything at the moment, with the current climate, with COVID, it's difficult to, for instance, put on fundraisers and do events and things like that. And obviously, I started off as in The Lion King, so I have always sang. And so the plan is to kind of do a show where I can perform, and all of the proceeds goes to the charity. Obviously, you have social media, which you can use, which is an incredible platform for raising awareness. But for me, it's meeting people and talking about them and understanding how this condition, there's such a spectrum of how it affects people, whether it is somebody with SS that's very severe, or somebody with SS that's lucky enough to not have to have, that hasn't had a stroke, for instance. It's not every person that has it, or SC, or even a carrier, because sometimes they can be affected, maybe a little bit anemic in the sense of, how it affects other illnesses they may have. But one thing that I've just done, which I'm really excited about, is I have just had a meeting and filmed some clips with Channel 4 for a show called Steph's Packed Lunch, which is on during the day now at 12:30. That should be airing next week, I think. And basically, it was amazing. We got to chat with one of the amazing ladies, Kelly, who has SS, and she was so inspiring. And I think that will come across to show just how severe, she had her first stroke at 16. In the years, I think she had 3 strokes in 3 years as well. And that was only within the last 5 or 6 years. So it's been really humbling, actually, to meet other people with a more severe form of the condition than me. And then also we managed to speak to my specialist, Joe Sharif, who works at St Mary's Hospital, who is my sickle cell consultant. And he again helped to talk about, basically the medical side of it, but also the most important, the most exciting part of it is the potential of a cure, which obviously at the moment it's incredibly debilitating to live with. And so that's all we want, is just, somehow to get there with the funds and the research in order to get there. But there's some great research and work being done with bone marrow transplant and stem cell therapy. And so we're on the way, as a team of people, as all warriors of sickle cell. We're on the way, and hopefully I can continue to use my platform to raise the awareness, to educate anybody and educate myself, because I'm always learning more and more about the condition, and really get those funds where they belong, and where they need to be, so that it's not, feeling like it's being left behind as a condition.
If there was one thing that you could change right now in terms of people's perception of sickle cell anemia, what would that be?
I think one of the main things that I would change about people's perception of the condition is, I think for whatever reason, and it's a very odd thing, is that there's a stigma of talking about it. There's people are almost embarrassed to say that they have it. And if we as people with the condition are scared to talk about it, then how do we expect anybody else to understand and learn about it? So that's definitely one of the things, maybe not as much now. It's still there, I feel, in the community, but maybe not as much now. But definitely like I said, I was speaking to Kelly, and she was saying that, there's been times where people have kind of said, oh, don't tell people, you know, don't mention it. And I think it is partly that fear of people looking at you differently and employers potentially not giving you the promotions or jobs that you deserve because they are worried that you know you're coming into this situation with a chronic illness. So I think that's definitely one thing, is us as warriors of sickle cell being more open and honest and willing to talk about it and not being a victim of it, you know. So I think that, but also just in general, there's so little in the media, whether it's on the television, the radio, newspapers, magazines, whatever it is, there's so little at the moment out there that most people, they're like, oh yeah, I've heard of that. What is it again? And they don't really have a clue as to what the condition is, whereas, you know, there's so many other conditions and everybody knows, and that is understandable, because as I said, it's not something that you get educated on growing up unless you know somebody with it.
Having seen you on Celebrity X Factor, you're obviously a really good singer, a very talented singer, as well as a good actress. I was wondering, what were your biggest musical influences growing up?
My biggest musical influences, and this is because of my mum and my grandma. So my grandma's Irish, and she's hilarious, and she loves her country music. So she would be teaching me how to knit or bake or garden, and I've got all of these incredible artists being blasted out around the kitchen or around the house, and that kind of transferred down into with my mum. So you've got, I don't know, Tammy Wynette, Engelbert Humperdinck, such a great name, Connie Francis, Crystal Gale, all these incredible artists. And I think the thing about that is they're great lyrically. And so that made a massive difference for me when I started to write songs. And at a really young age, there was so much sentiment to what they were saying. So that was one side of it. And then the other side of it was Whitney Houston. And that, I think she's probably an inspiration for a lot of singers and people in general. But we didn't have the money for me to go to drama school growing up. So I learned to sing by pretty much locking myself up in my bedroom and blasting Whitney and singing along to her until I learned every nuance and, you know, and every note. And that was how I learned to sing. And she was an incredibly big influence as well, because she had a fearlessness when she sang, and it was incredibly inspiring just to see her living fully in her talent and her skill. And then the one other person, and that has been as I got older, is Tina Turner. And that's because as far as her performance goes, the sentiment of her music, you can hear the struggle when she sings, you can see it when she performs, and there's a rawness to it that I really, really love, and I love the tone of her voice. So I'd say those. I mean, there are so many, it's hard to pick. They're all popping into my head now as I'm saying it. But yeah, I'd say those three, or at least that genre, and then those two particular artists had a massive impact on my career.
Motown 25, I want to talk very quickly about it, because even though that was 1983, which was possibly before you were born, it still remains the highest profile event that there has ever been to raise awareness for sickle cell anemia. Yet nobody knows, because obviously it was the night Michael Jackson did the moonwalk for the first time. And from that point onwards, the narrative completely changed. Motown 25 is now Michael Jackson and the moonwalk. Were you a Michael Jackson fan, like most people were of that generation, of a generation? What do you think, do you rate him? What do you think, how would you rate his legacy?
Mm-hmm. I was a huge Michael Jackson fan. There was something about the way he approached things musically that for me is a level of genius. And I think so many people, as far as his music goes, can understand that and just really felt what he was saying with his lyrics. And he had such an impact when it came to people, caring more about each other, at least to an extent of, for me, it was a global impact. And so I think, Motown 25, obviously, it showed his genius in his dance ability too, and it became, like so many of us have seen the incredible time with the moonwalk. But I think I don't believe his music will ever die, and I think that it's timeless. And I think the lyrics, the feel, the chord progressions, I think for me, there'll never be another like him. I think there's so many people that are influenced by him. You see it in artists these days all the time, men and women, everybody. And I think that in itself is a legacy for you to impact and influence and inspire so many people musically. Music it transcends right across the globe. And so for me, that's the legacy, the fact that you have been able to touch people's hearts with what you have had in your heart. That in itself is incredible.
Michael Jackson brought a touch of magic. Perhaps for the future, where do you see yourself going in music, or do you still want to be known as an actress?
I get asked so often whether I prefer to sing or act and what, my main passion is. And it's really difficult to really choose because, although I've been singing since I was maybe 4 or 5 years old, and my break into the industry essentially was 2007 in The Lion King. So, that was my break into that side of the industry, some musical theatre. Although that is the case, there's something really amazing about the visual aspects and the messages you can put across when it comes to drama, whether it's soaps or dramas or movies. There's a great, I think there's a little bit of magic in all of that, magic and mystery when it comes to what they can do with the camera and the special effects and things like that. And sometimes it doesn't have to have all the special effects. It can literally just be the truth, get into the truth of what you're saying. And I really, I started my TV career in 2014 with a show called The Royals, which aired in America, and that was before Coronation Street. So for me, that was, it's relatively new in comparison to how long I've been singing, but I don't think I'd be able to choose one or the other because music's been a part of my life forever, for so long. I'm sure I was dancing in the womb as my mum was dancing outside, and so I definitely think that it would be nice to be able to maybe amalgamate the two and do both. And you get these amazing shows where movie musicals like Dreamgirls and things like that. I think something like that would be amazing. But I'm writing music at the moment, but I'm also filming, so I kind of feel like I'm really just feeling fortunate that I'm able to have a creative outlet, especially with everything that's going on at the moment.
Huge thank you to Victoria for sharing her story with us on the Sickle Cell podcast, and massive love to Michael wherever you are. We miss you. We love you. Join us again in 2 weeks where I'll be joined with my co-host Maya for another Sickle Cell hot topic. Take care.